So we'll continue talking about graphs of sine and cosine functions. So here we are asked to state the amplitude, period, frequency, and sketch a graph. Okay, so the amplitude comes from right here. So the amplitude is 7. Next is the period. Period is 2 pi over b, which is 8. 2 pi over 8. Which is pi over 4. Frequency is the reciprocal of the period. So the frequency is 4 over pi. Okay, now the graph. Okay, so we're going to put in our axis. And we have a theta here, so this is going to be a theta axis. We won't call it an x-axis. Here's our y-axis. The center line is going to be 0. So this will also be the center line of our graph. The amplitude is 7, which means the maximum is going to be 7, and the minimum is going to be negative 7. As a cosine graph, it will start either at the maximum or the minimum, and since this right here is positive, it will start at the maximum. So it's going to start right there. From this point, we can just sketch a couple of cycles and then put in a couple of radian values. When we start at the top or the bottom, it's going to be curvy. We don't want it to come straight down out of that. It needs to curve from the top or the bottom. There's one cycle. There's another cycle. Okay? So after it has completed one cycle, it has gone the horizontal length being 1 period. That's pi over 4. Okay? The horizontal length of one cycle is 1 period. So then it goes another cycle, and the horizontal length of that is another period. So here it's gone 1 pi over 4. Here it's gone 2 pi over 4. And 2 pi over 4 can simplify to pi over 2. All right, so then we'll do another graph, this time a sine wave. Okay, so here is our theta axis and our y-axis. It's going to have a maximum and a minimum. And we'll figure out what that is by listing the amplitude. The amplitude is this right here, A. The amplitude is 5 over 7, which means that the maximum is 5/7. And the minimum is negative 5/7. The period is 2 pi over b, and b is 3/4. So I'm going to make that 2 pi over 1 over 3/4. So when I do loops here, I'm going to get a numerator of 8 pi and a denominator of 3. So 8 pi over 3 is the period. The frequency, which I'll write up above, is the reciprocal of the period. That is 3 over 8 pi. This graph is of a sine wave, which means it's going to start in the center. And it also has this negative in front, which is a vertical reflection. Which means instead of going up first, it's going to go down first. Now when we come out of the center, we are in the middle of a sort of a straight section here. So it goes down, and now it curves up and back, and that is the first cycle. And then down and up and back, and that's the second cycle. So the first cycle ends right here. The second cycle ends right here. The period is 8 pi over 3. So this horizontal distance of the first cycle is 8 pi over 3. And when we go another 8 pi over 3, we've got 1 times 8 pi over 3, then 2 times 8 pi over 3, which is 16 pi over 3. Next, we are asked to write the equation for a cosine function. So both of these are going to have cosine in them. Okay, we are given the amplitude A is 2.3. We are given the period is pi over 7. Okay, so if period is 2 pi over b, and I can think of this as a proportion over 1, in a proportion, I can switch diagonally anytime I want to. So b is 2 pi over period. To write an equation, we need to know b. So b is 2 pi, and we'll put that over 1, over the period, pi over 7. So we get 14 pi over pi, which is 14. So y equals, and it's going to be in the form y equals a cosine b theta. So y equals 2.3 cosine 14 theta. Now this does not actually tell me whether it should be going or starting at the bottom and going up or starting at the top and going down. So I really should, I'm going to erase this y equals and move it back. I really should include that whether it's positive or negative does not change the amplitude or the b, which means it doesn't change the period. So I should have a plus or minus there because whether that's positive or negative does not violate any of this information. So here, the amplitude A is 5 over 11. B is 2 pi over the period. So that would be 8 pi over 3 pi, which is 8/3. And again, it doesn't tell us whether this is going to start at the top and go down or start at the bottom and go up. So y equals plus or minus. Either one will not violate any of this information. 5/11 cosine 8/3 theta. Okay, write an equation from a graph. We still need the amplitude, and we still need b. So the amplitude, it goes from 0 all the way up to 3, or all the way down to -3. So the amplitude is 3. Here is one cycle, and the horizontal distance is from 0 to pi. So the period is pi. So b is 2 pi over the period, 2 pi over pi. So b is 2. So my equation is y equals, and because it starts at the top, it is cosine. Whether it starts at top or bottom, it's cosine. And since it happens to be at the top, it's going to be positive cosine. So positive 3 cosine 2 theta. Had it started down here and gone up, then I would have negative 3 cosine 2 theta. This one starts on the center line. So this one is going to be a sine wave. So the amplitude, right there, it goes 4 above the center line. So the amplitude is 4. To get B, I put 2 pi over the period. Okay, so if I trace one cycle, I could start here, and it begins to repeat when I get here. So it goes from negative pi all the way to 3 pi. Okay, so I've got pi on this side, 3 pi on this side. That's a total of 4 pi. Or if I wanted to, I could start here and go to here, but that's only a quarter of a cycle. I could go all the way to here and get a half a cycle, and that is 2 pi, and I would double it to get 4 pi. Okay, now when I simplify this, the pi's cancel. 2 over 4 is 1/2. So y equals, I know it's going to be sine, and anytime it starts in the middle, it's going to be sine, but since it goes up, it's going to be positive. If it started here and went down, it would be negative. So it's going to be a positive sine. So positive 4 sine 1/2 theta.
So we're going to close this lesson with a couple of practice waves. We need to state the amplitude, the period, and the frequency of each function. Then we will draw the graph. So from this equation, we can get A and B. A is right here. A is 11. B is here. It is 6. What that tells me is the amplitude is 11. Okay, so there's the amplitude. Next is the period. The period is 2 pi over B, 2 pi over 6. And that simplifies 2 pi over 3. And then the frequency is the reciprocal of the period. It's how often it repeats. And that is 3 over pi. Okay, now a graph. So here is our theta axis. Here is our vertical axis, our y-axis. It's sine, which means it's going to start right here in the middle. Its amplitude is 11, so it will go up as high as 11. It will go down as low as negative 11. And I'll draw 2 cycles here, so it goes up and back, and then down and back, and there's one cycle, and then here is a second cycle. Okay, so this begins to repeat itself right here. It starts at 0, and it goes all the way to pi over 3 by the time it has completed one cycle. And then it goes another pi over 3 to complete a second cycle. So this is 1 pi over 3. After a second cycle, it is at 2 pi over 3. And there is our graph. Our next equation, A is 2/3. B is also 2/3. So that means the amplitude, A is 2/3, the amplitude is 2/3. The period is 2 pi over B, which is 2/3. So I'll actually say this is 2 pi over 1 over 2/3. And my outer loop here is 6 pi. My inner loop, multiply those and I get 2, which simplifies to 3 pi. So the period is 3 pi. Okay, we also want the frequency, which is the reciprocal of the period, which is 1 over 3 pi, which means it repeats itself once every 3 pi, just like this repeats itself 3 times every pi. Okay? So let's talk about that frequency just a little bit. So what that frequency means is it repeats itself 3 times every 1 pi. It repeated itself at pi over 3. It repeated itself a second time at 2 pi over 3. It would repeat one more time at 3 pi over 3. So it repeats itself 3 times by the time it gets to pi. This one will repeat itself 1 time by the time it gets to 3 pi. Okay, so now our graph. So here is the theta axis and the y-axis. It has a maximum of 2/3 and a minimum of -2/3, and because it's cosine, it will start at the maximum. So it's going to start right here, and it will be curvy because it's at a maximum, so it's going to curve its way out of there. And there is 1 cycle. And there is a second cycle. Okay, so a period is 3 pi, so it goes from 0 to 3 pi. And then before it repeats itself again, it's gone another 3 pi, which is a total then of 6 pi.